Yes.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for logging in. We are going to have a conversation around the current and future impact of COVID on the retail sector. And on board on the panel, we have various members who have an interest in this part or play a role in this particular sector. On the panelists, we have Dhruv Shah. Dhruv is the Development and Director at Sarit Center. Then we have Willie Kimani, who's the Chief Operations Officer at Naivas. He also happens to be the current chairman of the Retail Trade Association of Kenya. Then we have Mark. Mark is in charge of, he's the head of retail at Knight Frank, the Uganda branch. And my name is Wamboi Mbarire. I'm the CEO of the Retail Trade Association of Kenya. I think we'll start with Willie, and Willie will speak to us and tell us his views on the anchor shops versus line shops, how shopping mall tenants dealt with the dip in foot traffic, and how the restrictions that have come with COVID affect the retail sector. Willie, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for logging and for API for this very nice event over the years. Always looking forward to the same. So, for all this, I think we have actually seen quite a period within, of course, which is unprecedented. And what we saw, of course, for starters, was even within the supermarkets themselves, we had what we call non-essential part of it. We had things like clothing, your crockery, your furniture. And it was quite an interesting part within which one, the first case is announced, and what we actually really saw was a serious spike. So we saw a very serious spike for almost 2 weeks, whereby we were actually almost doing double-digit growth, and people are really pantry loading at that particular point. Of course, even when people are pantry loading, they're buying two bar soaps, or the favorite word, which is the tissue papers of the world now. But you're not going to change the fact that right now you're not going to be having one bath soap and you're saying Corona soap and then normal soap. So that means that is now a soap or a sale that was going to be there for later time. And after that, subsequently, we also have we had some of the departments really dip. For example, the delis and the food items really dipped. We had the whole clothing, because people use clothing for different, most people are more in pajamas because of the working home scenario. The guys were for furniture, some started a small decline. But what has really amazed us over a period is that you'll have thought that high value items like electronics will actually sell less, but electronics spiked, a proper spike. To date, we've actually seen a very good growth in electronic sales since COVID started, which is off the norm of what we'll actually expect, that it's only food and all those things. How did this translate? And of course, crockery. Crockery, August, weddings, every Kenyan always has some dinner set and all that, which now changes, actually no more of the same. So we're now stuck with departments that clearly are seasonal and they were not going to move or sell at that particular period. So this was affecting the anchor. Then you now have, of course, the departmental stores within the malls we operate, and you could actually clearly tell people struggling. People with beauty shops, there's actually not much going on. The clothing stores, excess stocks, people mapped out enough stocks at the same time. You have your, for example, I really pity some of the stationary people, because you have excess, you know back to school is going to be coming in, you need stocks 2 months prior to this, so you have that. You can imagine there's someone stuck with success cards for this year's KCSE exams that now has to be postponed to next year, November. Yeah, and that has actually been able to, so we've seen a lot of headache when it actually came to the line shops. Most of our members in Retrack really were quite actually up in arms, for lack of another word, and that's why they requested us, can we talk to as collectively as an organization, as in to just come in and try and talk to to the real estate partners and see how they can actually be able to be helped during that particular period. Because one, now they're stuck with excess employees. Two, their overheads are still the same as far as rental is concerned, apart from electricity, maybe because they're now shut and all those things. Getting some sort of leverage or talk towards the real estate partners within how we could actually come in together and just have them assisted. So you have foot traffic still coming into the malls, but more specific actually going in there. So what else changed? Something that also changed quite dramatically was the basket value. The basket value has actually shot up, but the traffic on the other side has actually completely declined. So you're actually seeing people coming in less, spending more. But at the same time, guys are more prepped. So it's actually spending more, it's buying more, but taking even less time. Because of course there's the restriction. Someone doesn't want, if you remember, one of the key things retailers had to do is now start to control how many people are inside my mall, especially the supermarket. They cannot have more than 10, we start letting in guys in groups of 10s, so that 10 guys out, 10 guys in, control it, and then of course the curfew period. You have to operate until 7. By 7, that means your staff have to be safe. You have to close at least by 6. Customers, then you have to tell them by 5:30 we are shutting down. So you start closing at 5:30. So which brought in a lot of complexities and changed people's aspect of, will I go in and queue in there? Then that means people now started changing and doing things. So that time element was a mess, and we were quite happy when government changed tact and changed the time from 7 to 9.
Thank you very much, Willie. I keep saying in a conversation this morning, I was saying there must be very many happy wives out there, because with the men staying at home, they need to make the home more comfortable for themselves. So the wives and the family gets to enjoy that now. Thank you very much. I think I'll call on Mark. Mark, we have quite a number of malls across the continent, and in South Africa, and of course in East Africa as well. What has been the impact? Who's done well? Who's not doing well? What are the learnings out of this, and how do we see the sector in terms of mall management going forward?
Wambui, it's a a very simple question to ask. None of them are doing well at the moment, and there's a lot to learn, but one has to unpack that. It's been a roller coaster ride. Let's be honest, you've had countries that have gone into lockdowns, some partial lockdowns, some very draconian lockdowns to try and limit the transmission. You've had some countries which have done nothing, and it's been business as normal. Now, if you look through the Knight Frank portfolio, which stretches from South Africa, Zambia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda, each country has had a different impact from government legislation from lockdown. What is interesting to note, though, that when one looks across the revenue, one looks across the sales and the turnovers that have been generated in the malls, it's pretty much similar. What it does prove to us is that if one country sneezes, all the countries around it catch the cold, and we really do live in a global village today. A lot of what Willie is 100% spot on throughout the market. The consumer has been impacted, and there's been a transition and a change. Today, you see this performing very well. Tomorrow, it changes dramatically. And it's not the consumer that is trending differently. It's the imposition of government legislation on the consumer, which is changing their patterns daily. The regional shopping centers have probably been the most dramatically affected. That and potentially CBDs, central business districts, for two different reasons. In reality, the central business districts, possibly because of the lockdowns on traffic and movement, and people generally wanting, because of the curfews and because of the lack of additional product, and I'll get to that now, they are tending to stay a lot closer to home. Central business districts, by their design, are limited with residential capacity. So you've had an impact there. The regional shopping centers, by their very nature and design, are your essential services, which are your convenience, your supermarkets, etc., are not necessarily in a super convenient location in the mall, because the very design of the mall is to bring the destination dedicated consumer to that product and move them past the rest of the product in the mall, so as to create a want to purchase incidental purchases. The same philosophy is used with leisure. The cinemas, your gyms, your that sort of thing within the big regional malls, and as well as your big box fashion. So your destination dedicated things which in reality should be super convenient are not in super convenient placements. And that has had one impact, because people are looking for the convenience. There is a bit of agoraphobia where people are scared. They're trying to limit the interaction because nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. We've had this fear drummed into us. And everybody, well, not everybody, but fortunately most people are being protective of their health and the ability to transmit. The leisure side, which forms a great component and footfall driver into the malls, has obviously been closed in certain markets. I mean, your gyms are closed, your bars, nightclub type of operations, as well as the cinema industry. The cinema industry has been dramatically impacted by the aspect of Nollywood, Bollywood, Hollywood not releasing product. And they're now talking, even while the cinemas in the South African market, and Kenya is due very soon, even in Uganda, we had them open for a period of time. There's just no new product, so there's nothing to entice the customer. So that whole regional shopping center sort of package, which blends these various tenant mix and operations to draw a larger primary captive trade area, has been more impacted than the community neighborhood type of shopping center, which is more sort of super convenient, and you found the transition going to there. Currently, a lot of people are talking, is this the future of retail? I think it's very, very difficult to predict that. And I think if one tended to try and move in that direction very quickly, it would be very knee-jerk, because the regional centers in most instances don't have 20 or 30 or 35% of their product actually trading at this moment in time. And that's having a big impact on the footfall. There is, and obviously back into trading, there is also the impact which Willie has mentioned. The consumer trend and pattern is changing from a purchasing point of view. You've seen people move to electronics. I mean, after lockdowns, the most interesting thing that has happened in the fashion industry is the boom in casual clothing and the boom in kiddies clothing. Obviously, kiddies clothing is simple. 2 months or 3 months of lockdown, being opened, kids have outgrown their clothing. So you're seeing a huge spike. Formal wear is obviously on the decline because people aren't going to office, they're working from home, etc. And that's also creating the spike in casual clothing. When we got locked down, I found out I had 2 pairs of shorts. The moment we got opened, I had to go out and buy them. So yes, you are seeing that. Is it a lot? Time will tell. People are very social by their nature, and once leisure and that sort of thing opens, I think you'll see a transition back. Will people change away from super convenience? You'll probably lose some along the way, but people will still go back to having fun and enjoying life at some stage. We don't know where. E-commerce, you asked us to chat on that. E-commerce has had the best bounty in the history of any business. There's always a transition in any sort of business, and they've just been given the greatest lifeline ever. But we also need to take that into context. I mean, the whole industry talks about the transition away from bricks and mortar retail into online, into e-commerce, etc. But do we actually look at the raw data in reality? I mean, if you look at the American market, 12% of retail sales prior to COVID sat online. The biggest market in the world is the Chinese market, 22% sat online. Okay. So there's space for both to play without a doubt. If you look at the South African market, online sales, after pushing it as hard as possible prior to COVID, sat at no more than 2%. So we have to be reality. We see bricks and mortar closing in the American market, but it was a very sophisticated bricks and mortar, very formalized bricks and mortar shopping center industry and culture. And if 12% of your market moves online, it's going to have an impact of 12% on the bricks and mortar. So when you're starting to talk about hundreds of stores closing and thousands of shopping centers being repositioned, in reality, out of how many? The boom has come now. Obviously, there's always been a difficulty within the African market. I mean, if you look at Uganda, take Kampala, for instance, you don't even have street numbering. So the logistics of the delivery of online is very difficult. We also have never had proper postal systems which we can rely on. So there's a whole trust issue on online. I mean, you've seen specifically in Kenya, your biggest online retailer that opened up with huge capital expenditure 2-3 years ago, moving into bricks and mortar shopping, which accounted for 90% of their transactions. Certain products, yes, electronics, etc., have boomed. Fast food delivery, that sort of convenience has boomed. But we also need to always remember when we talk about online and e-commerce, we talk about the likes of Amazon, we talk about Airbnb, we talk about Uber. At the end of the day, retail is just a distribution channel for the rest of the economy. It's the last point of distribution to the consumer. Airbnb still needs a bedroom, an apartment, a hotel room, or whatever. It still needs bricks and mortar for somebody to occupy. Uber still needs a taxi for somebody to get in and move around. It is just the channel of distribution that's changed. And in certain instances, fruit and vegetable, that sort of thing, people still want to be able to purchase. There's some product, books transitioning into online, electronics into online, etc. But there will always be a need for bricks and mortar shopping because people want to touch, feel, purchase, but they also want to be entertained. And retail at the end of the day is purely theater, a distribution channel of a product in a theatrical environment.
Thank you very much, Mark. I love when people say that the online and the brick and mortar is not in competition. They actually will complement each other. And I always take Amazon and see if they've gone into brick and mortar after this many years of online. There has to be something for brick and mortar and it's staying alive. So to move on to Drew, I listened into a panel yesterday. The discussion was around that a lot of malls, even pre-COVID, did not have, on average, they have not more than 60% occupancy. I know Sarit doesn't have that kind of challenge, but a lot of the malls do suffer that challenge. So moving forward, what lessons are you learning in regard to the relationship between landlords and tenants? Are we looking to start discussing more about, say, turnover rent? Because I always feel turnover rent allows the landlords to play a role in the retailers' activities to ensure everyone makes money.
Thanks, Reese. So I'd say the landlord-tenant relationship is like any relationship. When time's good, no one thinks about the relationship. So clearly COVID has put real stress on this relationship. And I'd say for me, the biggest challenge was understanding how the health crisis would evolve and how it affect both the and the tenants. For example, what Willie mentioned, the last 2 weeks of March in Kenya saw massive panic buy, and our and queue crazy like we've never seen before. However, everyone knew that was not sustainable. So we spent the last 2 weeks of March trying to understand how COVID would affect our tenants. And it's clear, as just as Mark said, COVID would affect different tenants in different areas. That's one. And second is, no one knew still how the crisis was going to evolve and is going to evolve. So as a we have 240 tenants. So 120 of those were existing relationships and 120 were expansions. So essentially had two bucket relationships we had to deal with. Those tenants we knew very well, some over 35 years, and those tenants who were fairly new to us. So we took stock of that, and I think two or three things came out. First is communication. Tenants are just as scared as we as a landlord as to what's going on. And prioritizing to the tenant that the landlord does not collect rent, put all of it in his pocket. You'd be surprised at how difficult that conversation was. You know, whether as a landlord you just funded a big expansion or so on, the landlord has obligations that it requires its rent for. You know, in our case, it was a big debt burden that we just used to fund our expansion. So communicating to the tenants that giving rent sessions is not easy. Here's the percentages, and let's be done with it, was crucial. And we actually took the time to speak to pretty much every one of our 140 tenants to try and understand, based on what they treated, how the health crisis affected them. And at the same time impress upon them that we as a landlord had obligations to our financiers on one side, and of course obligations to keep them all safe, keep them all clean, keep them all secure, keep them all insured, and pay all of those costs would traditionally go in service charge. So the conversation very quickly shifted from a tenant calling us and saying, not paying rent, we're not paying you service charge, we're not paying you motion fund, to actually understanding, well, it is a fair deal for both parties. And we took rent concessions for those tenants whom it was applicable to. We would not do on a month-by-month basis. I think everyone realized that COVID was not going to come and go in weeks. So we've taken a 6-month approach to this in conjunction with our financiers, and come up with an approach where we hope every one of our tenants would be able to trade sufficiently to pay rent. So relationships are crucial. Relationships are always two-way relationships. And I mentioned existing old tenant relationships, new tenant relationships, didn't actually see a distinction in how they understood what we wanted to do. So as an environment, we are now at the end of our 4th month of rental consents, and our recollections to some extent have been fine, because we've timed the consents to some extent and the nature of the concessions, how tenants trading. So when it comes to e-commerce, it's a bit more difficult. So we've actually proactively tried to help our tenants get into that e-commerce space, simply realizing that mortar and e-commerce both have their bases. So through some of our platforms, be it social media platforms or partnerships with the likes of Little Biz and others who are trying to aggregate onto e-commerce platforms, I said, fine, great. As long as products are sold and you're up there, there's really no issue. So I would take this point on this, that commerce or online has to stay with brick and mortar. And what we as a mall are looking at is saying, well, how do we get people into our mall? In the current situation post-COVID, is a mall really now a collection of shops? It's not. A mall is actually get people in, so it's ambient environment, it's F&B, it's social interaction, it's cinemas, it's exhibition spaces, it's entertainment and so on. And we're fairly confident that if you get more, they will shop. And we've seen, for example, with Max and Bishop, there are two tenants in two categories that Mark mentioned, which is and kids clothing. Both of those been 2 weeks ago in the middle of the crisis, and they are trading fantastic. They are trading fantastically. So what we are trying to decipher, and this we were trying to decipher pre-COVID as well, is the role of a shopping mall going forward. And it is clear that it's not just a collection of shops. And what COVID has done is it's given us an insight into shops or product structurally just don't need to be in a shop mall. So in a strange way, the weaker tenants, or they were already struggling. The business model was broken or was about to be broken. This is just accelerated that, and COVID is sort of teaching us as to how we should position our mall and how the retail mix in the mall should work. And we strongly feel that if those two things are done properly, there is still space for malls like ours to function. There is still space for within malls to function properly, whether they have to adapt their business model slightly or not. And then it is up landlord-tenant relationship to help, and be it turnover rentals, which I think are a double-edged sword. Financiers eat it. How do you bank turnover rentals into your booking model? Retailers love it. So we've been exploring hybrid models. I think William will list some of his will have that. Rental, which will satisfy financiers or fixed discharge costs. And yet, then some sort of turnover element can come into play. I think the question of trust in turnover numbers is still a big one. So while we have looked at turnover rentals with the likes of Carrefour or CYT and other, say, international retailers, how do you bridge that element with turnovers or figures for other tenants? That's a big question. We've looked at downsizing of space, where a tenant doesn't need 200 square meters, can trade efficiently in 100 meters. That's clearly a benefit to land and tenant in the long term. So we've looked at that. And being that it's about understanding which tenants will benefit each other. So a big part of the whole extension is placing tenants where they benefit from being placed. So we've gone down the strategy of retail loops, where the is in the right location. And I'll just give you one example of a loop. It's our leisure and culture, which is anchored by Textbook Center, who built their flagship store in our extension. Based our sports, our toys, our hobbies, our crafts, our cameras, and so on next to them. At the start of that process, it was hard to get the tenants' buy-in. Why are you doing this? Why are you placing me next to my competition, for want of a better word? But if I to those tenants, they're very, very happy. These tenants are collaborating with each other. When one does not have the product, but knows that expert, they're not getting that lost. They are directing that customer to tenant next door so that everyone benefits. So I guess in some relationships are key, but understanding the pressures everyone faces, tenant and landlord, communicating those pressures effectively. And I think negating the crisis in a flexible manner, such that once and if crisis is over, still have a mall which occupied and tenants which enables them to trade and for them to pay rent. Say we're partway into the journey. No one knows what's going to happen. We're just keeping lines of communication open because that's absolutely key.
Thank you, Drew. I agree. I think the only way to move forward on that relationship is by constantly speaking to each other. Before I go to Willie, who's a tenant, I'll want to ask Mark, as a landlord property manager, what's his view on this relationship?
Look, it's historically and at times the landlord tenant, managing agent tenant has been an adversarial role because people are pulling from different sides. I think one of the things that COVID has taught most people is that we're all in it together. You've heard the saying, we're all sacrificing together. Not either of our fault, but what it has done, it has taught people that we are humane. We're all human, and we all have to find a way through this. I mean, it's just very interesting in East Africa, the resistance historically from retailers for turnover rental, simply because it's historically been seen as an aspect of just a landlord trying to maximize his return and taking money out of a retailer's pocket, where the retailers haven't necessarily understood that that incentivization for a landlord to incur additional rental incentivize them to invest more, whether it be in the marketing, the maintenance, and keeping the product topical within the local market and growing the local market, the primary catchment market, to that development, and therefore growing the retailer's sales. Now, when things get bad, you now have retailers running back to landlords and saying, please, can I move on to turnover rental? It's there for the good and the bad. It's there to engage. And I think a lot of goodwill has come out of the formalized retail shopping center industry, where landlords have gone to retailers. I know it's happened in Uganda, it's happened in Kenya. Prior to the retailers actually coming and asking, landlords have come forward and said, okay, guys, there is a problem. There is a concern about sustainability. Let's look at how we can help you. And retailers are turning around and saying, wow, we've never encompassed this before. But let's be in reality, that historically it's always been an issue where people have traded relatively well and everybody's trying to get their piece of the action. Landlords aren't as bad as they're made out to be, because they are astute, they understand the necessity of good business, and that is why they've come to the party. I haven't heard of any of the formalized retail landlords throughout Africa who haven't said, let's work together and make it happen. So the relationship has been forged in tough times, and I think it can only bode well for industry going forward. Both sides of the party have learned to understand each other and have cognizance of each other's business, which is not dissimilar. I mean, we're all going to business investing capital to see a return, and we're all trying to maximize our return. But at this point in time, we've all learned how to work together to maximize each other's return.
Thank you, Mark. I wish I had a smaller other than women, because the smaller don't feel the love of land. So it's interesting to hear that the discussions are there, but I hope that both with Drew and yourself, and that you are actually talking to the smaller retailers, especially those in non-essential retail. They are really suffering, and they definitely do not feel any love coming out of you, with the exception of a few malls that have done things. So really, as a large retailer, I'm sure you feel the love from the landlords and property managers. How does that go? And what is your view on turnover rent as well?
First and foremost, we're coming from a scenario where there was a lot of retail space, people, a lack of retail space, so people used to really compete. So it was about how much per square footage am I paying above the other person. There was no openness within numbers. Again, the trust element never used to exist. Both ways. And of course, for a real estate player, it was much simpler that he was quite assured of his percentage revenue by virtue of this is my square footage. I have 18,000 square foot. You're paying 100 bob per square footage and a service charge of XYZ. And I'm assured month on month, just pay me. But things are actually changing and all that. And it's actually the best way, if you ask me. We have to face facts here. What we have two bad things that happen within the retail industry. One, most leases don't have exit clauses. And now people are stuck together. In one side, I know of a retailer who was actually, a landlord who was a retailer who was not paid him for the last 2 years. He's not even, just trading 2 or 3, 4 items, a bakery here and all that. They are not paying. In fact, in the media, they've actually all said it's dead. But here you are, the landlord wants this retailer out, but no, there's a lease, no exit, registered, nothing out. On the flip side, the other retailers the other landlords who, of course, the other retailers who are struggling, they are not able to pay. So, if you can just mute.
I don't know who has, there's summit up there. Maybe you cannot mute. There's summit up there. Maybe cannot mute.
Now, and then at the same time, now we have another challenge which actually comes in here, which is a retailer who is not making money at a site. He has clothing, he's not been selling. He took too much space, thought the space will actually work. It's now no longer working, or maybe a dynamic change, a road changed here. He needs to make a quick call. Another person opened 2 or 3, 4 other malls. He has tried the much he can do. They need to have that discussion within which they have to divorce. As Drew started by saying, this is a relationship. Divorce is a keyword in this too. It's an element within which we all have to agree at one point, some people have to leave each other. And that is actually a headache. And which actually brings us to that point, which is people need to have more dynamic lease agreements. Be it one from the issue of an element of turnover rent, which is something that most of the retailers right now are really open to, and Mark is really correct. Most people will think at that particular point, this is, so this guy wants to take my Christmas sale. So when I am having my high Christmas sale, then why should I be paying Groove more? No, then he's forgetting he has his February, which is no sale. And at that particular point, Groove is also going to be saying, hey, what do we do together to actually make our mall work, and then we actually get guys up. And that is where we need to all go to. But, and I'll be honest, half the retailers are all waiting for the court case between ShopRite and Waterfront Mall. We really want to hear what is actually going on. There's a cheering squad all backing up here, and we are all waiting for that because it's supposed to be one of the defining moments. We also with the debacles within which people are kicking others out in Mombasa or which other malls, and other guys who are actually getting in, or people are still holding on to. So these are, and we are talking about anchor tenants here. And then of course now what is happening with the smaller tenants, which is actually a bigger headache. So that person who just owns a jewelry shop within a mall and clearly he can't pay, or clearly you need someone to exit that so that you actually have another person in who can actually be able to give you more revenue share. This is of course going to be existing, but I think Kenyan market where we are right now, we have to agree that we need to address those two particular elements: turnover rent and exit rent.
Excellent, excellent. That for me is the biggest concern for the smaller retailers. I want to pose that same question to Market Group. Turnover rents will be a challenge, especially where we use dollar leases. I think there's still people who have dollar leases. And then also it's more, and I want to refer to a question that I'm seeing on the group that says the problem with turnover rents is that they are then denominated in local currency and are also less predictable from a financing perspective. How do we overcome this issue, and what do Drew and Mark think about this from an asset owner perspective?
So should I start, Wambui? Yes, I think
That's
first
okay.
to your point, Yeah, first of all, to your point on smaller tenants versus anchors, we actually took a contrarian approach. We told our anchors that with our limited support from our banks, to our smaller tenants, and we offered our concessions to our smaller tenants and not our anchors, with the angle being that if we come back after this and the mall is comprised of 6 anchor tenants and no line shops, it's not a mall. And actually the anchors built into it, the anchors, the tier 1 banks and so on. So it is actually about the smaller tenants and line shops. They make up the heart and soul of any shopping mall. I think to your point on term rentals, look, I think it depends on the financing strategy of the asset owners. So I think in Kenya, it's rare to have fully dollar denominated financing. I think most models either on a hybrid mode or use shilling financing. So when it comes to turnover rentals, be in low currency, not an issue. And I think there are ways to structure it, and we have where the base rental can be payable in dollars and any turnover component can be payable in local currency. So we've done that in a couple of cases. But just more to the general point on turnover, we have about 10 tenants turnover rental. And if we looked at 2019, early 2020, all of their effective rentals thought their rental option would have been. So, for example, tenant A, who we were expecting 180 shillings a square foot from in total, we'd structured it such that 100 shillings was base rental, the rest was turnover. And pretty much in every scenario, the effective rental at the end of it was plus minus 10 shillings away from 180. So when the nature of the tenant's trade well understood and turnover rents are well benchmarked, I wouldn't say least, but transparently delivered, I think as an asset owner, you will end up over a 0 or 10-year period and from the tenant you require. So if you take a long-term approach to things, forget being high and fair, and your cash flow profile can handle it, is a great approach. Perhaps has views on.
Mark?
Yeah, just to add on to what Dhruv and Willie have both been saying, I think the most difficult aspect and where people lose sight, and this comes from into termination clauses and into turnover rentals, is you cannot manage what you can't measure. Now, the reality is a turnover clause is a very simple aspect. The landlord has a viability that he has to see. And this goes back to Fair's question on the chat. The landlord needs to see a return on his loan to be able to cover that to go ahead and develop. A tenant needs his landlord to develop. Otherwise, the tenants would be all developing their own space. It's not their business. So that's where the partnership is formed. The problem that happens with that partnership is people now start pulling at different aspects. The landlord hasn't an idea of what the turnover is or what the viability is that the tenant is doing. So when it comes to a renewal, because remember, these are long-term relationships, the landlord is looking for that, the tenant is looking for that, and neither party actually understands each other's business. That renewal should be a very simple exercise. If the tenant is giving their turnover figures, is on a turnover rental, the landlord is able to project a year, 18 months ahead of time as to what his stream is going to be, and it becomes a lot more realistic negotiation. Similarly, it comes to the termination clauses. No landlord wants a tenant to terminate because they've got a fixed loan repayment. But the problem is it's not being managed properly, because on turnover and on turnover rental analysis, any landlord can start predicting a year, this tenant is not trading. This tenant is not performing. Let's now look for an alternative. Let's rather, landlords are not in the business of suing and attaching houses and that sort of thing. We need to understand that landlords can only go backwards on their budget at this point in time. If a tenant defaults or if a tenant doesn't pay, and they're looking to recoup that. The industry, both from retailer and from landlord, needs to start working proactively and saying, okay, you're not trading, you're not performing. Give me a mandate to relet. Let me find somebody to take over your occupancy. It can't be one-sided that the tenant wakes up today and says, okay, I'm going 6 months. Cheers. And the other problem is, it also can't be from the landlord's point of view, because we start creating a risk factor here. The majority of leases that are in Kenya, 5 years, 5.5 years because of certain legislation. But if you look at retail throughout the world, they run between 3, 5, 10 years. The reason for that lease period is not necessarily the landlord's financing arrangement. It's the retailer's arrangement to pay back the capital that they put into the store. I mean, rule of thumb, 5 years, 3 years, you pay back your capital, and 2 years, you make profit. Now, the risk comes when the landlord sees, but hang on, I've got a better tenant at a better bill after 6 months of the tenant having capitalized the business to say, goodbye, I'm giving you notice and change. So we've got to be very careful when we start talking termination clauses and we start talking these things. We need to understand each other's business. We need to proactively manage. I mean, we know what it's like as a managing agent. You walk into a tenant shop and you say, you haven't paid your rental. And he turns around to you and he says to you, I just haven't had time. Business is fantastic. Everything's great. I'll come pay you tomorrow. He doesn't have the money to pay. Honest. The next guy is turning around. You walk in, you say, where's your rent? He says, get the hell out of my shop. I don't want you anywhere near. You're useless. You're this, you're that. He doesn't have to keep favor with you, because when you breach him tomorrow, he pays you. You know, it's the need to take the emotion out of it. We need to start operating for the betterment of landlords and retailers on a scientific approach.
Thank you. I think we really have a lot of work to do in terms of bridging that relationship, just so that we realize as retailers and as property or landlords that we really do need to work each other together. I want to find out if there are any questions from the audience, because I think we've covered most of it. Yes.
I think just one by Charles. Charles was asking what average basket. Approximately 38% BV growth during this time, so quite impressive. What you're seeing is that people who used to come 4 times a month are now coming at least are the most affected. The guys for twice or once a week are still almost in sync. That's from our loyalty card data as far as their parts and all that. But the guys for 4 weeks, mainly the weekly shoppers have really cut down on their trips, and basket value grown by 38%.
Has grown by 38%.
Willie, sorry, if I could just add on to that. Wambui, sorry, if I can just add on to what Willie is saying. Willie, what's interesting is if you look throughout the whole of East Africa and down into SADC, you're seeing the exact same thing in the supermarket industry, lockdown or no lockdown. Less trips, higher basket size, and it's varying from 15, 20% in some markets to as high as 66% basket size growth in other markets. But the pattern is the same. So the consumer is being impacted by what is happening on a global aspect, irrespective of the lockdowns, etc., or that happening in different countries. Obviously, certain countries, if you look at South Africa, has been hugely impacted because the supermarket industry, 12% of their sales is in alcohol, and alcohol's been banned. So, yeah, that's impacted basket size, obviously.
Thank you. I think we'll take closing remarks now. We are about to run out of time. I'll start with Drew.
Yeah, so landlord-tenant relationships, long may they continue. I think is always key. And I think the understanding for malls that if you have 250 tenants, to be in a different position and have to tailor solutions based on that. That's closing remark.
Thank you, Mark.
The short term, the near future, we've historically created leisure, entertainment, holistic approaches in the retail industry. We need to create safe, quick, easy, accessible, convenient developments in the short term because the consumer is not feeling comfortable and is not feeling confident. And to succeed in the short term, we need to change our operational structure, whether it be the retailers or the malls. Quick, easy, safe, follow the operating procedures and create an environment where, under the current circumstances, people feel safe, comfortable, they can shop quickly, easily, and get home safely.
Thank you, Willie.
My closing remark, of course, is to support everybody and just to say, hey, you know what, the relationship is supposed to be mutual. At the end of the day, there's a landlord, there's a landlord's agent, there's a tenant. They all need to they're all in the business of actually making money. And so if it actually calls for us to review the parking calls or to review the service charge and the amount there, the last few years, actually I can say 2 or 3 years back, the mall activations by most real estate has really gone down. We actually all used to know Christmas because by September, early October already, you have malls activating, having all your wins and cars. It's no longer as deep or as good as actually it used to be. You can clearly tell now people are more centric towards what is there. All these activations need to come back, and of course, mainly they're all driven by both tenants and everybody just coming all together. And also coming in, there's one thing when we had our retrack with our small, the SME players, we're all clear that the landlord wants to do this, but his agent doesn't. So there's actually a roadblock here. So as in, so Mark and Group, as in, it seems like there also seems to be a way. Mark has already put his projections for the revenue for the next few, and now here is a landlord, and the landlord is okay, and the tenant is actually not. So there's a mix there within which also absolutely we definitely need to finally come in and just get ourselves together.
Willie, you're dealing with the wrong managing agent.
And so hopefully we'll be able to actually get more and more, and let's see how everything can actually come up and all come together, and we actually grow retail in this market, because there's a lot of growth. And of course the discipline also again that comes in, the real estate discipline of having one mall after the other mall after the next mall and all those things, people really competing, anchor tenants going into places whereby you'll never feel a mall by virtue of you've just gone and opened a mall right next to the other guy. So here you are, you'll never have the occupancy that you want, and then you're just having someone moving in from this other mall to this other new mall to run away from the rental obligations and stuff like that. So I think, thank you everyone, and those are my closing remarks. Asante.
Thank you very much. Yes, we must put a lot of work into the relationship between the two parties. Mark, to Willie's point, the landlords didn't come out shining, believe you me. I had 2 malls that everyone spoke about, and that was where the landlord manages for himself, i.e. Druve and Village Market, for example. Those were, because they had a direct relationship, they felt that those people listened to them. So yes, we might be dealing with the wrong property managers, but I think there's a need to pull up your socks in that sector. As an association, I see the need for us to engage more with SCAC, for example, because I think there's a lot of education that we need to pass on to our members to ensure that people realize that we can create a win-win situation for both of us. And retail is here to stay. The malls are here to stay. How do we ensure they grow and everyone benefits going forward during COVID and post-COVID? Thank you very much. I hope we have all enjoyed your listening in to this session. Thank you very much to our panelists, Dhruv Shah, Mark Dutoit, and Willie Kimani. We hope to see you next time, next year, in the same summit. Thank you very much.
Cheers. God bless. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.